Hello and happy Sabbath. Welcome again to our living room. Now today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. And why not? Nothing about this is normal. Normal times I wouldn't be talking to you from my living room. What I'll do normally is I'll take a passage, I'll work through it, and I'll draw out different points and lessons from that particular passage of scripture. But this week I'm going to take a topic or a subject and we'll look at that for a bit. But even here, I'm going to do something slightly different. I'm going to take something that's well known, something that's foundational, something that's not new. But I want to maybe look at it from a slightly different angle. Maybe focus on some points that you might not have thought about. Maybe some that are going to be new for you. So today, we're going to have a short look at the Sabbath. We're going to have a look at some of the different aspects of the Sabbath. Now, this isn't going to be an in-depth Bible study. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to highlight some of the different ideas of the Sabbath that we find in the Bible. Because it's so much richer and so deeper than we often think about. So where shall we start? Well, let's start at the very beginning. And on the seventh day, God finished the work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all the work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and hallowed it, because on it God rested from all the work that he had done in creation. Now this passage is foundational. At the start of the Bible, God creates the world and then he rests and hallows the Sabbath. And this sets the pattern for all of time, for all of humanity. Why does God need to rest? Now if I get off my bike or if I just finish mowing the lawn, I need a break. But does God? No. God doesn't get tired or weary. What he is doing here is he's creating sacred time. Now, if we had longer, we could look at Genesis and we could see how creation, in that creation account, it shows God creates sacred time and sacred space. But by creating sacred space, it does two things. Firstly, it shows that God is the creator and sustainer of life. The Creator has first call on the creature. He orders and patterns our lives, and they are fulfilled and happy when we keep them. Resting, as he asks us to do, acknowledges that he is the sovereign God. He is the Creator. But secondly, it's also an act of grace. He invites us to share in the benefit of what he has done. We can't do the work that he has. I can barely bake, let alone create a world. But he invites us to join with him in hallowing and resting on the Sabbath. We gain all the benefits of his work, a work that we could never accomplish, yet we get to share in his rest. Sabbath is grace. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. For 6 days you shall labour and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God, and you shall not do any work. You, your son, your daughter, your male or female slave, your livestock, or the alien resident in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heaven and the earth, the sea and all that is in them. But he rested the seventh day. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and consecrated it. How do you remember something? Maybe you write it down, set a reminder on your phone. Why do we remember? Well, the simple answer is we don't want to forget. Why do we keep silence, for example, at 11 o'clock on Armistice Day? It's so that we don't forget those that lost their lives during the wars. Why do we remember? Because those that forget the past repeat their mistakes. The Sabbath commandment is the longest of the commandments, and that might make it the most important. If you compare it with the others, there's no do's or don'ts, shall not. It's remember. It's a reminder that we need to participate in God's accomplishments of creation, covenant, and care. It's a reminder because we forget. We forget that we have a Creator. We forget that He has set patterns for our lives. We forget His goodness and grace. God had to tell a new nation that had lost its history and traditions. God has to tell a world that has forgotten its origin. God has to tell you and me, us, to remember the Sabbath. For 6 days you shall do your work, but on the 7th day you shall rest, so that your ox and your donkey may have relief, and your homeborn slave and resident alien may be refreshed. This passage tells us that the benefits of observing the Sabbath are relief and refreshment. In his book called What I Believe, Jacques Ellul, probably pronounced that wrong, I always do, a French academic, wrote that the Sabbath was a day of adoration, praise, freedom, joy and delight. So I suppose this leads me to ask an important question. Is it? And if not, why not? Unfortunately for many people, the Sabbath is not a day of relief and refreshment. Maybe it's our legalistic past, our Puritan heritage, but whatever it is, it has stopped too many people from experiencing the true blessing of Sabbath. I probably need to pause here a moment because I know that some of you are going to quote to me Isaiah 58, verses 1 to 3. If thou turn away thy foot from the Sabbath, from doing thy pleasure on my holy day, and call the Sabbath a delight, the holy of the Lord, honourable, and shalt honour him, not doing thine own ways, nor finding thy own pleasure, nor speaking thine words. Unfortunately, this is one time where the King James Version does not do a very good job of translating the Hebrew. The word here, the word for pleasure, refers to working for a living. God is not speaking against pleasure. He's speaking against working, doing business on the Sabbath. Finding your own pleasure should actually be translated finding business or looking for customers. God is talking here about checking your office email, not about enjoying your family and your church. But actually, I think many of you are beginning to experience this idea of Sabbath as rest and refreshment, especially in this lockdown, as we work from home and our days merge from one into the other. I've lost count of a number of you who told me as I've spoken to you, as I've called you, as we've maybe Zoomed, and you told me that the Sabbath has become more and more a joy and a pleasure. Maybe it took a pandemic to show us how the Sabbath could be a relief and a refreshment. For 6 days shall work be done, but the 7th day is a Sabbath of complete rest, a holy convocation. You shall do no work. It is a Sabbath to the Lord throughout your settlements. Leviticus 23:3 shows us that proper Sabbath keeping is to respond in worship. The passage is translated convocation or sacred assemblies, but one of my favourite modern translations puts it this way: you have 6 days when you can do your work, but the 7th day of each week is holy because it belongs to me. No matter where you live, you must rest on the Sabbath and come together for worship. This law will never change. This is why we meet when we can do so legally. This is why we meet together. This is why we're together on Zoom. This is why I'm doing this now. This is why Sabbath is not simply another duvet day or a day off work. Our proper response to Sabbath is worship. If your remembering the Sabbath day doesn't include worship, then you might not be doing it right. Observe the Sabbath day and keep it holy, as the Lord your God commanded you. For 6 days you shall labour and do all your work. But the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, you, your son or your daughter, your male or female slave, your ox or your donkey, or any of your livestock, or the resident alien in your towns, so that your male and female slave may rest as well as you. Remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and that the Lord your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day. So in the Exodus commandment, Sabbath is a reminder of creation. In Deuteronomy, it's a reminder of liberation. On one level, this is a reminder that God is not just your creator, he's our saviour. And again, that puts grace, not legalism, at the heart of the Sabbath. But it's also a reminder that God is not just interested in our worship, he's also interested in our work. So what do I mean by that? Well, the story of the Exodus, the message of the Old Testament prophets, tells us that God takes seriously the concerns of human dignity. Slavery, human exploitation, and economic justice matter to God. And so they should matter to us too. Keeping the Sabbath reminded them of their release from coercive production, and it should encourage us to treat others respectfully. Now in a moment I'll talk about how the Sabbath should bleed into the rest of our lives, the rest of the week, but this is one example of that. You can't claim to remember the Sabbath and reject the dignity of someone else. You can't claim to remember the Sabbath and exploit someone else. You can't claim to remember the Sabbath and ignore the cries for justice from someone else. And by the way, that's not me, that's the prophet Isaiah telling you that this morning. See, the Lord has given you the Sabbath. Therefore on the 6th day he gives you food for 2 days. Each of you stay where you are. Do not leave your place on the seventh day." So the people rested on the seventh day. That passage where God provided for them in the desert and provided extra manna for the Sabbath teaches us an important lesson. Because since the Industrial Revolution, man's worth has been determined by their economic output. Our attitude to work both defines and values us. Just look at the argument at the moment going on about the value of a human life versus the cost to the economy. Now, Sabbath turns this on its head. In the ancient world, if you didn't work that day, you didn't get to eat. Sabbath says, "My value is found in the God I serve. I put my trust for survival in Him, not in my productive value." Sabbath is putting faith in the God who says, "I will provide." And God is faithful. God provides enough for 7 days, even if you've only worked 6. And that's grace. He worked for you. And that grace, that idea that your worth is found in God and not in your economic output, is a challenge to this world. It's a call to live counterculturally. It's a call to be different. It's a call to remember the Sabbath. Then he said to them, "The Sabbath was made for humankind, not humankind for the Sabbath." The Puritans were known for their legalistic approach to religion. They had rules for Sabbath keeping. They had lots of rules, but the wrong day. It's been jokingly said that their command was, "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it gloomy." Yet, a Puritan goal that we often forget about was that the Sabbath day should overflow into every day of the week. So let me introduce you to an idea called rolling the Sabbath. Now yes, don't get me wrong, the Sabbath, the seventh day, is important. It's the memorial of creation. It's a day we're commanded to keep. But we remember the Sabbath on more than just one day a week. We remember our God. We remember our rest. We remember our worship. We remember the relief and refreshment. We remember the liberation. These things should become part of each and every day. Sometimes we're so worried about keeping the right day that we forget to let it shape our lives. You see, we should become formed by the Sabbath. Let me introduce you to a really important concept. We become what we do. Our habits form, they make us. So the pattern of the Sabbath should meld and influence our lives, not just divide up the weeks in a diary. Let the Sabbath shape your life. So then, a Sabbath rest still remains for the people of God. For those who enter God's rest also cease from their labours as God did from his. Let us therefore make every effort to enter that rest, so that no one may fall through such a disobedience as theirs. We remember not only so that we don't forget, but that we prepare for what is going to come. The Sabbath doesn't just point back to creation, it points forward to a future reward. And just as we are invited to share the sacred space with God on the seventh day of creation, man is invited to spend eternity with their Creator, Sustainer, and Redeemer. That passage in Hebrews tells us that Sabbath rest now is a foretaste of that future rest. It's yet another sign of grace, a future that we don't deserve, sharing the benefits of God's work. All the aspects of the Sabbath that we've talked about, and many more, will find their reality in the heavenly rest. So remembering the Sabbath is an act of faith. It says, yes, we believe the promise of Jesus' return and an eternity in God's presence. So I hope today you'll have discovered that the Sabbath is a deeper and more special idea than you knew about before. I hope you discover that it is rest, it's remembrance, it's refreshment and relief, it's worship, it's liberation, it's countercultural, it forms our lives, and it points to our reward. But it's one thing to know it, it's another to experience it. So today, I want to challenge you to experience the grace of God and remember the Sabbath. May you experience the rest. May you remember what your God has done. May you share in his joy. May you be worshipful. May you find freedom. May you trust in God's provision. May you allow him to shape you. May you long for the establishment of his heavenly kingdom. May the Lord of the Sabbath show you grace.